everyone, it's Jennifer from Flux. In this video, we're going to learn how to crochet the Fluffy Granny corner to corner blanket. This is a really easy blanket to stitch up, and we're going to be using this really fluffy, fun yarn. Now you can use other yarns, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But we're going to be working in the spaces because it is corner to corner, and it'll be much easier if you're using a fluffy yarn like I am. We're going to learn how to begin at the corner, work upward and outward in like a diamond shape rather. Our blanket will be square, but we're going to work upward and outward from one point, and then we're going to learn how to come in and decrease. So we're going to increase, then decrease at the topmost point. Now we're going to be using some yarn cakes, so the colors will kind of do the work for you, but I'm also going to show you how to kind of have more control over the colors if you want to eliminate a color or order your colors differently than the cake suggests. So let's get started. The finished blanket measures about 60 inches wide and is about 60 inches tall. So it is a square blanket. And when you do your increase, if you need to change up the sizing for whatever reason, when you're doing your increase, when we go from increasing and then we're going to switch gears halfway through the video and decrease, you can just make your increase as big as you want it to be, and then when we go to the decrease, that'll just finish off the blanket. So you can adjust the sizing as needed, okay? For this project, you'll need a pair of scissors, a tapestry needle, a ruler or tape measure is super helpful to measure as you go along. We're going to be using a 5.5 millimeter eye crochet hook for this project. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the yarn for this project. I'm going to be using a yarn called Red Heart Fleece Hugs. I'm going to use 4 cakes of this. Now, as a side note, you may have noticed at the beginning of the video, let me just grab the blanket here, there is no green in my blanket. So when I make projects for people, if I'm giving the blanket away, I always ask them what colors they like, and the recipient for this particular blanket is not a fan of any shade of green at all whatsoever. So when you are making blankets or projects for people, it does help to know what their favorite colors are. And when I made my blanket, I simply took the green from this cake, and you can sort of pull it out very carefully. See how I'm sort of very slowly, and it'll come out as like a chunk of color. Just like that, and you can kind of just use the rest of it. So I will say, as a side note, even though I'm saying 4 cakes of this, I used a tiny bit less because I didn't use any of the green parts of my blanket. Just so you know, I did the aqua, pink, and white is what the recipient wanted. So if you use all 4 cakes, your blanket will be slightly larger than mine, but I just wanted to mention that as a side note because I didn't use the green sections of my cakes. This colorway is called Lilies. Each one of these cakes is 415 yards, 380 meters, 200 grams. So I'm going to say 4 cakes on that, but I didn't use the green. So yours might be slightly larger if you use the entirety of all 4 cakes, okay, just as a side note. So our blanket is going to be a corner to corner style in a granny stitch. So we're going to start at the bottom point and work upwards and outwards and learn how to do the increase portion, and then later on we're going to learn how to bring it back in on the decrease portion to create our square. So it's going to be like a square but turned to the side so the point is down. We're going to be working point up, out, and then back into the other point. So like I mentioned a few minutes ago, I'm going to take out the green part because the recipient is not into green, and I kind of was glad because I wanted to be able to show you how to sort of dissect a cake. Now you can use the colors as they come to you, or so what some people like to do is pull out sections of the color and have the colors separate so they can sort of manipulate them into the palette that they want. So you could do, if you had your 4 skeins, you could do like a big color block of green, a big color block of pink, white, and blue, and so forth. I happen to have a cake where there's green in it, so we need to take out the green. Now, I sort of showed you a minute ago, but all you're going to do is just carefully lift it out. Now, I will for sure use this for another project because it is very pretty, but you just want to snip it. When you start seeing aqua, I like to do a little bit beyond it and snip it off, and then I'll save this for something else, and it'll be very pretty and fun for something else. So I'm going to start with my aqua yarn here. And what we're going to do is start at the bottom, like I said. So what we need to do is chain 6. But first, we're going to put a slip knot on our hook. So let me just zoom in. So what we're going to do is wrap the yarn around your fingers to make a loop. Bring the yarn behind the loop, reach in with your hook, bring up the loop, and tighten, okay? So next what we're going to do is chain 6. Now to make a chain, wrap yarn around hook and bring it through. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. As a side note, one of the reasons why I chose a granny stitch for this project is because the yarn is very fluffy, and as you can see, our chains aren't super duper visible. It just looks like a thicker fluffy strand. So working into the spaces as you do with granny stitches, and the blanket that I shared a few weeks ago, the granny miter square with the same yarn but a different color, we also did a granny miter square with that. So working into the spaces is a little bit easier to see for these types of projects. So go all the way to the chain that you first made and insert your hook. We're going to work a slip stitch in the chain farthest from our hook. So bring up a loop. Now bring that loop through the loop already on your hook. Now we have our ring that we're going to be working into. And our tail, we're going to hold along the edge as we work to weave that in as we go along, okay? So what we want to do next for row 1 is to chain 4. This is going to count as a double crochet chain 1, and that'll make a little bit more sense as we sort of unfold here. So chain 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And actually, let me zoom in just a tiny bit more. And then what we're going to do is work 3 double crochet into the ring. Okay, so into this circle, we're going to make a double crochet. So to make one of those, wrap yarn around hook, insert the hook into the center of the ring, bring up a loop. You'll have 3 loops on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops, wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the last 2 loops. Okay, but we need a total of 3. So that was 1. Now let's work our second double crochet. That's 2, and our third double crochet. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is chain 1. And then we're going to work a double crochet into the center of the ring. Okay, so this is row 1. Okay, so then what we need to do is chain 4. We're going to transition to row 2. So pull a little bit of yarn out of your cake, and we're going to chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Once again, that counts as a double crochet chain 1. And then we're going to turn our work. Now sometimes we can kind of lose our place when we're working these types of things, and in addition with fluffy yarn, but just make sure that tail is facing you, and when you turn, just make sure that tail is still facing you. That's the bottom of our work, okay? So then what we're going to do is this chain 1 space that we just created, you're going to work 3 double crochets into that chain 1 space. So 1, 2, and 3. Okay, then we're, whoops, I missed my loop, last loop there. Then we're going to chain 1, and then we're going to hop over. Remember those 3 double crochets that we worked? We're going to skip over them. And then in this last chain 1 space at the end here, see that loop on the end? We're going to work 3 double crochet. So 1, 2, and 3, just like that. And then we're going to chain 1, and then we're going to work a double crochet in the same space once again. So work a double crochet. And now row 2 is complete, okay? So we have a group of 3 double crochets here, and then we have 2 at the top here. It sort of looks heart-shaped at this point. Okay, so let's move on to row 3. What we're going to do for row 3 is chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Once again, that's going to count as your double crochet chain 1. And remember that tail is at the bottom. We're going to turn our work. Okay, so that tail is still at the bottom facing us. That's the bottom point. I don't like to weave that in right away because I like to use it sort of as a marker. Okay, so in this first chain 1 space, remember that space at the end? We're going to work 3 double crochet. 1, 2, and 3, just like that. And then we're going to work a chain 1, and then we're going to hop over to the next chain 1 space. So every time you do a chain 1, it creates a chain 1 space. We're going to hop over to there, and we're going to work 3 double crochet, 1, 2, okay, our third double crochet, and then chain 1. And now hop over that grouping of 3 double crochets from the previous row and that chain 1 space at the end of the row here. We're going to work 3 double crochet once again, 1, 2, 3, chain 1, and then 1 more double crochet on that same space. Okay, just like that. So we have the beginnings of our little granny triangle. Okay, so what we want to do now, since it's growing, let me zoom out just a hair. What we're going to do now is repeat row 3 over and over and over again until our blanket is about half the size you want it to be. So if you can imagine in your mind, this is part of our square, and then we're going to create the other part of our square later. So you want to make it roughly half the size you want it to be, as if you cut it in half. Or an easy way to do that too is use roughly half the yarn, okay? Now again, I removed one of my colors, so my yarn will be a little bit different. Yours may come out a little bit bigger. So let's repeat row 3 one more time, and then we'll rejoin and learn how to do the decrease portion of our blanket. Okay, so once again, we're just repeating row 3, which is what you'll do. So once again, we're going to chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Turn your work, making sure that tail is still pointing downward. And then in that first chain 1 space, we're going to work 3 double crochet. 1, 2, and 3. And then what we're going to do is chain 1, hop over to the next chain 1 space. Now, as you may notice, there's more chain 1 spaces along the side. So as your triangle grows, you're going to have more spaces to work in, okay? So hop over to that next chain 1 space, and what you're going to do again is work 3 double crochet. 1, 2, 3, chain 1, hop over to the next chain 1 space. There's an extra one this time around. Next, there'll be more in the next row. So work 3 double crochet. 1, 2, 3. Get a little bit more yarn here. Those center pool cake yarns are so nice. Chain 1, and then in that last chain 1 space at the end, so you're going to skip over those 3 double crochets. And as you may notice already, it's so much easier to work in the spaces when you have fluffy yarn. See what I'm saying? Okay, so chain 1 space, work 3 double crochets at the end there. So 1, 2, and 3. Chain 1, and then you're going to work 1 more double crochet into that space. Okay, so I just repeated row 3 once again so you could see it one more time. So let's go ahead and repeat row 3 over and over and over again. And you'll want to make sure, because we are making a perfect square, you'll want to make sure the number of rows you make for the increase portion before we come back in with our square are an even number. And that's going to be really important, because when you make your decrease, the number of decrease rows is dictated by the amount of increases you made, okay? So you need to make those increase rows an even number, but that's going to make your square a perfect square. It's going to be a little off if you don't do that, okay? So keep repeating row 3 over and over and over again until your blanket is roughly half the size you want it to be, working an even number of rows. So let's stitch those up, and we'll be right back to now decrease. Just working that very last stitch of the increase portion of our square here for our blanket. And you may have more yarn or a little bit different dimensions if you use different yarn or you didn't remove a color like I did, but I am at the end here of my yarn. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to work on the decrease portion where we're going to bring that point back up, and also how to join on a new ball of yarn. I'm going to show you two different things here. So what we're going to do is we're going to, now you might need to cut your yarn, but I don't need to. So wrap your yarn around the hook and pull it through the loop. Okay? Now we're going to grab our yarn, and I followed a color sequence with mine. So my next color is going to be the pink. Okay, so what you want to do, now there's lots and lots of different ways to join yarn. I like to cut the yarn and just kind of tie it right on. If you have a different way of doing it, definitely feel free to do it that way. So that last stitch we worked, we're going to reinsert our hook back into that stitch. Now it's fluffy, so you might need to sort of wiggle it in there. Just like that. Make sure too that you go through 2 loops, because if you only go through 1 loop, you can kind of distort your stitch a little bit. Hook the new yarn on there and just pull it through, okay? And again, we'll deal with all these tails at the end of our tutorial. So just tie it right on to that stitch, and this pink you'll be able to see a little bit easier. Okay, so we're ready to begin a new row. We're also ready to begin decreasing our square. So we have like a diamond, a triangle shape, and we're eventually going to have like a diamond shape or a square turned on its side. So reinsert your hook back into that same stitch where you tied the yarn on, bring up a loop, and then we're going to chain 4. And I'm just going to zoom in a teeny tiny bit to show you. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we're going to turn our work. So let me get this blanket flipped over. And then what we're going to do is skip the first space. So see this space right here? This very first space of our row? We're going to skip over that. This chain 4 once again counts as a double crochet, chain 1. And we're going to hop over that first grouping of 3 double crochets and go into that next space. So see this space here? We're going to skip over that, go into the next space, and work 3 double crochets. So 1, 2, and 3. And then we're going to chain 1, and you can kind of see how that looks. And then we're going to hop over to the next space, and we're going to do the same thing. 3 double crochet, 1, 2, 3, and chain 1. And we're going to do this all the way across. So go to the next space, work 3 double crochet. Let me grab a little bit more yarn over here. 1, 2, 3, and chain 1, okay? So it might look a little odd at the beginning here when we start, but we are decreasing. So it's going to start to kind of sharply come inward, okay? And that's what we want, okay? It might look a little bit weird at first, but once we get a few rows in, it'll look more normal. Okay, so let's keep working 3 double crochet, chain 1 into each one of these spaces. And then once we get towards the end of the row, I'm going to show you what to do next. So I'm just about at the end of the row here, and I have a space here and then a space at the end of the row as well. So what we're going to do is work 3 double crochet, chain 1 in that second to last space. So 1, 2, and 3. Chain 1, and now to finish off the row, all we're going to do is put a double crochet in the top of that turning chain, okay? So at the very top of that turning chain, you're just going to put a double crochet. You're not going to work anything into the space. We're just doing a double crochet to finish off the row, the very top chain of that turning chain from the previous row, okay? And that's it. So as we work our blanket, our triangle will start to curve back in, and we'll see the square or diamond beginning to take shape. So just keep repeating the row we just did over and over and over again until you have just a small few spaces at the top, and then we'll rejoin, and I'm going to show you how to finish off that point, and then we'll do a little bit of finish work, and then our blanket will be complete. We are in the home stretch. I'm working that second to last row, just finishing that off because I want to show you how to work this very last row. And I'm going to show you what I'm talking about here. So work that last double crochet there. So as you can see, we're almost to a point. Now I have my 2 end spaces and then the center space. So all we need to do is chain 3, 1, 2, 3 when you get to this point, and then we'll turn our work. I have a big blanket here off camera, so it's gotten quite large, which is great. I love a big fluffy blanket. Okay, so what we're going to do is, remember we skipped the first space, and we're going to work 3 double crochet into that next space. So 1, 2, and 3, chain 1, and then we're going to work our double crochet into that last double crochet from the previous row. Okay, and so the end of your blanket will look kind of like this. So what we need to do now is grab our scissors, and we're going to cut the yarn. I just have a teeny tiny bit, as you can see here, so it's definitely not enough to keep going. And we're at the end anyway, so I just had just a smidge of yarn. Okay, so wrap the yarn around the hook, bring it through to finish, and then the last thing we just need to do is weave our ends in. So whenever you have a project with lots of colors like this, you're going to have different color ends. So what we want to do, now this is more some chunky sort of color block stripes, but you want to keep the same color of your tail in the area of the same color. Because if I were to weave this aqua into the pink, it would really stand out. And this yarn, because it's so fluffy, is very forgiving. So you just want to go in one direction through these loops here. And this granny corner to corner stitch is reversible also. I may have mentioned that earlier, but in case I didn't, it's reversible. So you just want to go in one direction, come back in the other direction with your tail, and then snip that yarn, and then you can sort of straighten things out, okay? So as you can see, I just wanted to show you this part too. We're going to go ahead and weave in the rest of the ends, but we have a nice 90-degree angle for our blanket. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and weave in those ends. Now some of these ends here, where you started with one color and ended with another, may have 2 colors like this one here. So like I said before, you just want to stay in that aqua. So I'm going to send my tail this way, and then when I do the pink tail, I'm going to stay in this pink area. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and weave my ends, and then we'll rejoin, and we're going to look at the blanket in its entirety. All right, so all of our ends have been woven in, and our beautiful blanket is complete. So we started from one corner, we worked outward and upward, changing colors as we went, and then we came inward to, let me go back up here, the other corner, okay? So that is how you crochet the Fluffy Granny corner to corner blanket. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure and click the subscribe button to get all the latest Fiber Flux video updates. Thanks again.